My girlfriend posted, "Some people are meant to be temporary lessons, not forever choices," 3 days after leaving me for a wealthier guy she met through social media. I didn't respond publicly or privately. Months later, her own friends started sending me screenshots after he suddenly disappeared alongside thousands of dollars she loaned him. Some people are meant to be temporary lessons, not forever choices. Madison posted that 3 days after leaving me. I woke up to 17 notifications, mutual friends tagging me, people reacting, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years sending me a screenshot with nothing but a question mark. The post already had thousands of likes before I'd even made coffee, before I'd even brushed my teeth, before I had any real idea how completely my life had just been rewritten and published for public consumption without my permission. She wasn't just moving on. She was making an announcement, a declaration. She was telling everyone in our shared orbit, our Brooklyn circle, her Instagram followers, her college friends, her coworkers, the mutual acquaintances we'd spent 3 years accumulating together, that leaving me and choosing Jordan had been some kind of spiritual evolution, some kind of leveling up. She wasn't heartbroken. She was enlightened. She was the main character, and I was the lesson she'd finally learned. I stared at my phone for a long time, long enough that my coffee went cold, long enough that the morning light shifted from gray to gold across the kitchen counter of the apartment we used to share takeout in, the apartment she'd helped me pick throw pillows for, the apartment that still smelled faintly like her perfume even though she'd been gone for 72 hours. I didn't reply publicly. I didn't text her privately either. I didn't call. I didn't post anything vague or wounded or retaliatory. I didn't send a voice note to her best friend Leah, hoping it would get back to her. I didn't do any of the things you're supposed to do when someone publicly humiliates you with a motivational quote. I just put my phone face down on the counter and went to work. But 4 months later, Leah started sending me screenshots in the middle of the night. And that's when I understood that Jordan wasn't the man Madison thought he was. That's when I understood that the lesson she thought she'd learned had been the wrong one entirely. That's when I realized silence had been the loudest thing I ever did. I didn't realize it then, standing in that kitchen with cold coffee and 17 notifications. But that post changed everything. The thing about humiliation is that it's always loudest in the places where people know your name. In a city of 8 million, I should have been invisible. But Brooklyn, and specifically our corner of it, operated like a small town with better restaurants. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody talked. Everybody screenshotted. And Madison had timed her post with the precision of someone who understood social media the way a chess player understands a board. Within 48 hours, the post had become a topic of conversation in at least 3 group chats I was aware of, and probably several I wasn't. Nicole, who'd been friends with both of us since a rooftop party in Bushwick 2 summers ago, texted me something careful and vague about how she hoped I was doing. That told me everything. You don't send careful, vague messages to people who are doing fine. Meanwhile, Madison's Instagram was transforming in real time. The aesthetic shifted almost overnight. Gone were the cozy coffee shop photos and the Brooklyn Street shots and the lazy Sunday brunch posts we used to take together. In their place came something new. Something curated and expensive and aspirational. Rooftop pools. Airport terminals with designer luggage. Hotel balconies overlooking city skylines. Jordan's watch in the background of a champagne photo. A caption about choosing peace, followed by a caption about finally being chosen correctly. She looked radiant online. She looked like a woman who had escaped something small and arrived somewhere magnificent. Eric showed up at my door on a Thursday night with a 6-pack and the expression of a man who was trying very hard not to say something he'd already said. "You doing all right?" he asked, settling onto my couch with the ease of someone who'd been sitting on that couch for years. "I'm good," I said. He nodded slowly, took a long pull from his bottle. "She posted again today. Airport something." "I know. You saw it." "No," I said, "but I figured." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You don't have to pretend with me, man." And I wasn't pretending exactly. I was doing something more complicated than pretending. I was performing a version of not caring so consistently that I was starting to wonder if performance and reality were really as different as people claimed. I didn't feel fine, but I was going to act fine until the acting became true. That was the plan. Not a sophisticated plan, maybe, but it was the only one I had. "I'm going to be all right," I said. And I meant it, even if I didn't feel it yet. Eric didn't push. That was one of the things I valued most about him. He understood the difference between support and pressure. He stayed another hour, We watched something neither of us paid attention to, and when he left he clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "Call me if it gets loud in your head." I stood at my window after he left and watched the street below. A couple walked past, laughing about something. A delivery guy on a bike disappeared around the corner. The city kept moving, completely indifferent to the reorganization of my entire personal life. Somewhere across Brooklyn, I knew, Madison was probably photographing a cocktail. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 27. Madison was 25. We'd spent almost 3 years together, which is a long time at that age, long enough to build patterns and inside jokes and a shared vocabulary and all those invisible structures that make a relationship feel like a home. We'd met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Williamsburg, which was exactly the kind of origin story that sounds romantic when you're inside it and cliched when you're outside it. She was funny and warm and quick, and she had a way of looking at people like she was actually interested in what they were saying, which is rarer than it should be. I fell for her fast and without much resistance, which was also unlike me. I was not, at the time, a complicated guy. I worked long hours at a mid-sized marketing firm in Midtown, not glamorous, not particularly lucrative, but solid. A stable paycheck, a small apartment in Crown Heights, a predictable life built out of routines and small pleasures, and the kind of modest ambition that looks boring from the outside, but feels like contentment from the inside. I went to the gym 3 mornings a week. I cooked on Sundays. I read before bed. I called my mother on Saturdays. I was not a man who looked like a lifestyle ad. I knew that. It had never particularly bothered me. Jordan, by contrast, looked like he'd been generated by an algorithm specifically designed to produce aspirational content. He was tall and photogenic with the kind of jawline that photographs well, and his Instagram was a museum of carefully constructed desire, private jets and Michelin-starred restaurants, and sunrise workouts in Dubai, and smiling, important-looking men in conference rooms with panoramic views. Every caption was a variation on the same theme, built differently, grinding differently, choosing differently. He described himself as an entrepreneur and private investor, which in retrospect were 2 of the vaguest possible career descriptions a person could offer, but at the time they landed with a kind of authority that more specific jobs sometimes don't. He'd met Madison through one of those Instagram DM situations that seem to happen constantly now. She commented on a mutual connections post. He responded. They talked. And somewhere in the geography of those conversations, my relationship began its quiet collapse. I didn't know any of this at the time, of course. I found out the shape of it later, in pieces, through Leah's screenshots and Nicole's careful observations and the slow archaeology of hindsight. At the time, I just noticed that Madison seemed somewhere else. And I assumed, in the way you assume things when you're inside something and can't see its edges, that we were just going through a rough patch. That we'd come back to each other the way we always had. I was wrong about that, but I was right about almost everything else. There are 2 ways to understand a relationship that's ending. There's the way you understand it in real time, confused, partial, emotionally compromised. And there's the way you understand it afterward, when you can finally lay everything out flat and see the pattern that was always there. In real time, I noticed things but I didn't see them. I noticed that Madison had started spending more time on Instagram, not casually scrolling the way everyone does, but studying. Sitting across from me at dinner with her phone tilted slightly away, zooming into photos of hotel rooms and vacation destinations and women in designer outfits with captions about manifestation and abundance. She had begun, without announcing it, to construct an internal ranking system, a private hierarchy of lifestyles, with ours somewhere in the disappointing middle. She started mentioning things differently, not complaining exactly, but reframing. The apartment, which she'd once called cozy, became small. The restaurants we liked, which we'd always thought of as good, became mid. She started using phrases I hadn't heard her use before. High-value environments. Leveling up. The rooms you're in determine the life you get. Language she was absorbing from somewhere and slowly trying on. One night. This was maybe 4 months before the end, though I didn't know that at the time. We were leaving a restaurant in Park Slope, the kind of place we'd always liked, good food and no pretense, and a black Range Rover pulled up to the curb across the street. A couple stepped out, dressed well, laughing about something, the woman's bag something expensive and architectural. Madison stopped walking. She watched them for a moment. Then she looked at me. "Don't you ever want more than this?" she asked. Not cruel, not even particularly unkind. Just sincere. Which was, in some ways, worse. More than what? I asked. She gestured vaguely. At the street. At us. At the ordinary evening we were having. I laughed it off. Made a joke about the Range Rover's parking job. She smiled a little, and we kept walking, and I filed the moment somewhere I wouldn't look at it. Looking back now, I think she'd already started talking to Jordan by then. The subtle disrespect arrived gradually, the way temperature drops gradually. You don't notice the cold until you're already shivering. She started sighing at things I said, started offering small corrections to my opinions, not because she disagreed, but because the act of correcting me seemed to satisfy something. Started going out with friends on nights she used to spend with me, coming home with stories about rooftop bars and exclusive parties and people who actually had their lives together, a phrase she apparently deployed without noticing what it implied about the life she was living with me. I noticed all of it. I cataloged it without knowing I was cataloging it. And I kept thinking, rough patch. We've had rough patches before. We get through them. That's what 3 years means. The first time I actually heard Jordan's name, Madison mentioned him as a friend of a friend, which is one of those phrases that contains exactly as much information as it withholds. She showed me his profile once, in a moment I now recognize as a kind of test she was running. She held up her phone and said, "Have you seen this guy's life? Like, he just lives like this," with an admiration in her voice that she didn't bother to disguise. I looked. Miami trip photos. Rented yachts, though I didn't know they were rented then. A Patek Philippe on a tan wrist. Private business meetings in hotel lobbies with men who had the look of success without the specificity of any actual job. Captions about closing deals and choosing the long game. And the ones who doubted me know where to find me. An aesthetic of wealth so consistent and so aggressive that it felt almost like an argument. Good for him, I said, and I meant it. I didn't feel threatened. I probably should have felt threatened. I didn't. Jordan's posts multiplied. Madison's mentions of him multiplied alongside them. Always casual, always contextual. Oh, Jordan was saying something about this. Jordan actually went there. Jordan knows people who do that. He was being woven into the fabric of her daily references the way you weave in a new vocabulary word until it stops feeling new. Every time his name appeared on her phone, her entire face changed. I noticed it and didn't want to be the kind of person who noticed it, so I kept not saying anything, which in retrospect was its own kind of failure. Eric, who had a nose for nonsense, saw through it faster than I did. He came across Jordan's profile somehow. I don't even remember the sequence, and texted me a screenshot with the message, "Bro, that guy looks fake as hell." I remember looking at the message and feeling something I was too proud to name, and I remember typing back, "He's just some guy she knows online, don't worry about it." Eric's response was a single raised eyebrow emoji, the diplomatic equivalent of saying okay, but don't say, "I didn't tell you." I ignored it. Not because I was naive, exactly, but because the alternative, taking the concern seriously, having the conversation, confronting what I was seeing, felt like something that would make the ending more real. And I wasn't ready for the ending. Madison became emotionally distant the way weather changes, not all at once, but cumulatively. She was present less often. She texted back slower. She laughed at my jokes less. She started sleeping on her side of the bed in a way that felt deliberate. All the invisible architecture of intimacy, dismantled quietly, piece by piece, like someone who's been planning a move for months and has been slowly packing boxes they hope you won't notice. I noticed. I didn't say anything. And then one Tuesday evening she sat down at the kitchen table and told me it was over. She was composed. That's the thing I remember most clearly about the night she ended things. How composed she was. No tears. No shaking voice. No hesitation. She had rehearsed this, or something inside her had settled it long before she said it out loud. And by the time she was sitting across from me, she was already on the other side of it. "You're a good person, Nathan," she said. "I want you to know that." "That sounds like the beginning of a breakup," I said. "It is," she said. Simply. No apology in her tone. I asked her why. She gave me an answer that was careful and slightly philosophical, the kind of answer you arrive at when you've been rehearsing something for weeks. She talked about wanting a different future, about feeling like she'd been living too small, about realizing that she wanted things she hadn't known how to name until recently. And then she said it, the line I've thought about more than almost anything else in the months that followed. "Some people are meant for comfort," she said. "Other people are meant for growth." I understood immediately which category she was putting me in. She left that night, and the next morning she posted the quote. And by the afternoon, Nicole was calling me with the careful, tentative voice of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have to deliver. "Are you okay?" Nicole asked. "I will be," I said. "The post is." "I know," I said. "Do you want me to?" "No," I said. "Leave it." Nicole was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's already posting with him. Like, openly." I didn't respond to that. What Madison didn't know, what I didn't announce, because there was no announcement to make, was that I had decided, somewhere between reading the post and putting my phone face down on that kitchen counter, that I was going to give her the silence she'd earned. Not out of strategy, not because I was playing some long game, but because I genuinely had nothing left to say. She had said what she needed to say. She had posted what she wanted the world to see. My words, at this point, would only make her feel more important, only give the post more weight, only extend the story she was writing in which I was the cautionary tale. So I said nothing. The days passed. Madison posted aggressively. Soft life content, travel content, aspirational content, couple adjacent content that never explicitly named Jordan but always managed to suggest him. She was curating a new identity in real time, and it was working in the sense that people liked it and engaging with it and commenting heart emojis. The one thing she couldn't control, though, was who was watching. Madison kept checking if I viewed her stories. I figured this out because Nicole mentioned it. Apparently Madison had asked, in a too casual way, whether Nicole thought I was keeping up with her posts. She was watching her viewer list, looking for my name. I had stopped opening her stories completely. Not a dramatic gesture, just a line I drew quietly for myself. She was performing for an audience, and I had opted out of the audience. That, I think, is when she first started to feel it. The absence, the one reaction she couldn't curate. The recovery happened the way most honest recoveries happen, slowly, without fanfare, and with more backsliding than the version I tell at a party. I went to the gym. It became less about discipline and more about needing somewhere to put the energy that had nowhere else to go. I worked longer hours, which my manager appreciated and which I appreciated because concentration is a good substitute for feeling, at least temporarily. I cleaned the apartment and got rid of the throw pillows she'd helped pick out. I reorganized the kitchen. I went through the invisible process of converting a shared space back into a private one. I didn't talk about it much. Eric checked on me regularly, showing up with food or beer or just his presence, which was enough. Nicole texted. I answered. I didn't perform devastation and I didn't perform recovery. I just tried, gradually, to be honest about how I actually felt, which varied considerably from day to day and didn't follow the timeline I would have preferred. Some nights I missed her. Some nights I felt something that was almost relief, which confused me at first and then didn't. Some nights I opened my phone and had to actively decide not to go looking, not for her posts, but for information, for confirmation, for the particular kind of self-torture that social media enables. I made the decision, usually, not always. The gossip circulated and then faded the way gossip does. The post became old news. Jordan and Madison's apparent relationship became a known fact in our social circle, something people mentioned and then stopped mentioning. Life moved on, the way life stubbornly insists on doing. I was several months into this process. The gym, the work, the gradual reconstruction of a self that didn't organize itself around the absence of someone, when the strange thing happened. One night, I got a notification. Leah had followed me on Instagram. Leah, Madison's closest friend. Leah, who had been conspicuously silent after the breakup. Leah, who had unambiguously been on Madison's side of things, who had watched me become the public lesson without a word of defense. Leah, whom I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. I stared at the notification for a moment. Then I followed her back and waited to see what came next. 3 nights after the follow, my phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. A DM from Leah. No preamble, no explanation, just an image. I opened it. It was a screenshot of a conversation between Madison and Jordan. I recognized Madison's messages immediately, her particular way of punctuating things, the M-dashes she always used, the specific rhythm of how she typed. Jordan's messages were smooth and urgent. He was explaining that he'd run into an unexpected situation with a business account, a freeze, apparently, something related to international transfers, and that he needed access to some funds immediately. Just temporarily. He'd pay her back within the week, he said. With interest. He was so apologetic. He hated asking. He'd never ask if it wasn't serious. The amount he was asking for was $4,000. I sat with that for a while. Then Leah sent another screenshot. This one was from a week later. Jordan had a new situation, a deal he was on the verge of closing, but a partner had backed out last minute, and he needed to cover a short-term gap in capital. Could Madison help? Just until the deal closed. It would be back in her account within 10 days, and he was looking at a return that would more than cover it. The amount this time was $6,500. Madison's responses were defensive and optimistic. She was dismissing the concern in her own messages, assuring herself, really, more than Jordan. I know it's a lot, but he explained it. This is just how investing works sometimes. The deal is real. I've seen the paperwork. The paperwork, I would later learn, was not real. Leah sent a third screenshot, and a fourth. They kept coming over the next few nights. Not all at once, but in installments, like she was building a case and presenting it carefully. Each one revealed another layer, another request, another emergency framed as an opportunity. Jordan was good at this, extraordinarily good. Every ask arrived wrapped in intimacy and urgency, softened by the language of partnership and future and us. He made each request feel like a test of Madison's belief in him, and Madison, who was nothing if not committed to the narrative she'd built around him, kept passing the tests. I was watching a con operate in real time, through the evidence Leah was quietly excavating. Then I noticed something strange in one of the screenshots. I almost missed it. I had to zoom in, look at it twice, sit with the discomfort of what I was seeing before I was sure. Jordan had sent Madison a message, another emergency, another account issue, another request, the language polished and affecting as always. But something in the phrasing was slightly off. A turn of phrase that was oddly impersonal. A specific sentence that didn't feel like it had been written for Madison specifically. I screenshotted it myself, sent it back to Leah, asked if she saw what I was seeing. She responded after a few minutes. Yeah, I looked it up. He sent almost the exact same message to another woman the same week. I found her because she posted about it publicly. There it was. Jordan had a template, and he'd gotten sloppy or careless, or he'd sent the messages so many times that they'd become muscle memory, and he'd forgotten to personalize one. He had copy-pasted his intimacy, his urgency, his manufactured vulnerability, and the copy-paste had slipped. Madison, by this point, had loaned him somewhere in the range of $12,000 across multiple requests. The money was not coming back. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy, satisfying, even, to reduce Madison to a villain, to take the humiliation of that post and convert it into permission to be contemptuous. But the truth was more complicated, and I'd spent enough time thinking about it that I felt like I understood her in a way I hadn't while we were together. Madison had not grown up wealthy. That's not an excuse, it's context. She'd grown up in a household that was financially strained in ways she rarely talked about directly, but that surfaced sometimes in offhand comments, and in the particular hunger she had for certain things. Security, status, the feeling of arriving somewhere that other people could see and acknowledge. Social media had given that hunger a daily input. Every scroll was a curated gallery of lives that looked better than hers. Better vacations, better clothes, better relationships with better backdrops. The algorithm had learned what she responded to and fed her more of it. And she'd built an internal image of what a successful life looked like that had very little to do with what she actually valued, and everything to do with what photographed well. I hadn't known how to speak to that. I'd offered her something real, stability, consistency, genuine care, a life being built towards something. And none of it was easily photographed. None of it produced content. None of it translated into the kind of visible success that the particular architecture of her self-worth had been built to receive. Jordan had known exactly how to speak to it. He'd led with the image. He'd given her something that looked, from the outside, like a rival. He'd made her feel expensive, which is different from feeling valued but feels better in the short term. Madison didn't leave because I failed her. She left because Jordan made her feel like she'd finally become the version of herself she'd always believed she was supposed to be. And that version had been an illusion, a performance, a meticulously produced fraud. The painful thing was that this didn't make me angry at her the way I might have expected. It made me sad for her in a way that was clean and uncomplicated. She'd traded something real for something that looked real. She'd mistaken performance for substance. And she'd been so publicly committed to the story, the quote, the soft life content, the announcing of her own enlightenment, that when the story fell apart, it was going to fall apart in public. It happened fast, once it started. Jordan's accounts disappeared first. Instagram gone. LinkedIn gone. The personal website that had looked professional, The About page with the blurry skyline photo and the vague language about global investment strategy, gone. The phone number Madison had used to reach him went straight to a disconnected tone. The email addresses he'd used began bouncing. He had evaporated the way people evaporate when the architecture was always designed to be temporary. Leah told me the story in fragments as it unfolded. Madison had tried to reach him for 2 days before accepting that she couldn't. She'd gone to the address she had for him, an apartment building in Lower Manhattan that turned out to be an Airbnb he'd been renting by the month, a place that was now vacant and relist. The suits she'd seen in his closet on one occasion, rented. The car he'd occasionally picked her up in, a service. The watch that had appeared in 100 photos. She'd later find out it was a very good replica. The business, whatever vague shape it had taken in the documentation he'd shown her, existed as a legal entity, just barely, but had no actual operations. It was a shell, registered in a state that made shells easy, with no employees and no revenue and nothing but a name that sounded plausible and an address at a registered agent's office. And Madison wasn't the only one. Nicole found this out through a woman who posted about it publicly. A long, furious Instagram post from a woman in Atlanta who'd connected the dots after she saw Jordan's accounts vanish. She named him. She laid out the pattern. Other women started commenting. Other stories emerged, each one following the same basic shape. The DMs, the luxury aesthetic, the emotional acceleration, the first small request that seemed reasonable, the larger requests that followed, the disappearance. The fake wealthy guy had been running a systematic long game. Multiple women, multiple cities, multiple sets of borrowed cars and rented suites and replica watches. The mutual friend group absorbed this information in real time. The gossip that had once been about Madison's apparent upgrade was now about something else entirely. Nicole told me that people were being careful about what they said to Madison directly, but that privately the conversation had shifted decisively. Leah and Nicole both reached out to me around this time, not with screenshots now, but with something more like guilt. I should have said something earlier, Leah wrote. I saw things, and I didn't want to make it about the breakup. I told her it was all right. I meant it. What would saying something earlier have accomplished? Madison wouldn't have heard it. She'd been too committed to the story. She texted me on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember because I was in the middle of a work meeting, something about a client campaign, completely mundane, when my phone lit up on the table beside my laptop with her name. I finished the meeting. Then I opened the message. Hey, can we talk? I read it twice. Then I put the phone back down and went and made tea and stood in the kitchen for a while thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The post with its thousands of likes. The screenshots in the middle of the night. The collapsed accounts and the empty apartment and the replica watch. The lesson she'd announced to the world. 20 minutes later, a second message arrived. I didn't realize what I had. I sat with that one for a long time too. There was something in me that responded to it. Some part that had still been carrying the weight of what we'd been, that recognized her voice even in 8 typed words, that felt the pull of it the way you feel the pull of something familiar even when you know better. I won't pretend that wasn't real. It was real. But here's what else was real. I was not the same person I'd been when she left. The months of quiet had changed me in ways I was only beginning to fully understand. I had spent the silence getting honest with myself about what I wanted, about what I'd been willing to overlook, about the ways I'd prioritized keeping the peace over trusting my own perception. I'd done the uncomfortable accounting of my own failures in the relationship alongside hers. I'd emerged from that process with something I could only describe as clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is its own kind of protection. I didn't respond with anger. I didn't write the speech I'd imagined once or twice in the early weeks. The accounting of what she'd done, the itemized list of humiliations, the satisfaction of telling her exactly what I thought. That speech had dissolved somewhere in the months of silence. What remained was simpler than anger and harder to argue with. I typed back. I hope you're okay, Madison. I really do. But I don't think that conversation would be useful for either of us. Then I put the phone down and didn't pick it up again for 2 hours. She didn't respond. Or maybe she did, and I didn't see it for a while. It didn't particularly matter. It wasn't planned. These things never are. I was walking home from the gym on a Saturday morning. October, the air finally admitting that summer was over. And I turned a corner near the coffee shop on Vanderbilt that we used to go to on weekends, and she was there. She was sitting outside at one of the small tables, alone, with a coffee she didn't seem to be drinking, looking at her phone with an expression I recognized immediately because I'd seen it on my own face in mirrors. That particular look of someone processing something they're not fully ready to put into words. The look of an internal reckoning happening very quietly in a public place. She looked up as I passed, and we saw each other at the same time. Neither of us had the opportunity to prepare. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. The silence lasted 3 or 4 seconds, which is a long time when you're standing on a sidewalk looking at someone who used to know you better than almost anyone. She looked tired, not badly dressed, not disheveled. Madison had always had composure, but tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. The way people look when they've been managing something exhausting for months. The rooftop glamour of the Instagram posts was not visible here. What was visible was a person who had been through something and was working out what it meant. "You look good," she said. And then, because she was Madison and she had always been perceptive when she chose to be, "You look like yourself." I didn't know exactly what to say to that, so I said, "I've had some time to figure out who that is." She nodded, looked down at her coffee, then back up at me. There was something she wanted to say. I could see the shape of it moving across her face, the way things move beneath the surface of water before they break through. Maybe an apology, maybe an explanation, maybe something more complicated than either of those things. But some conversations are too large for sidewalks, and some things are better understood than said. "Take care of yourself," I said, and I meant it. Not as a dismissal, not as a performance of magnanimity, but as a genuine wish for a person I had once loved and in some quiet way still cared about in the way you care about people who were important to you, regardless of what they did. She nodded again. "You too, Nathan." I walked home. I made breakfast. I called my mother because it was Saturday, and that was the last time I saw her. I've thought a lot about what I'd say if someone asked me to summarize what happened. People like summaries. People want the story compressed into something they can hold and carry, a lesson, a moral, a satisfying turn of phrase that makes the whole thing feel resolved. Here's the truth, which is less tidy than a summary. I don't think Madison was a bad person. I think she was a person with a particular set of wounds and a particular set of hungers, who encountered someone skilled at exploiting exactly those things. I think she made a series of decisions that compounded in painful ways. I think the version of herself she was trying to perform cost her more than she was prepared to pay. I think about Jordan, occasionally, not with hatred, but with a kind of flat recognition of what he was. A fraud. A careful, practiced fraud who understood that people with certain insecurities were vulnerable in specific ways, and who built an entire architecture of illusion designed to exploit them. I hope he's been stopped. I don't know that he has. I think about Leah, who chose, at some cost, to tell me what she knew. That decision required something from her. Some willingness to prioritize honesty over loyalty, or at least to see those things as compatible rather than opposed. I respected it then, and I respect it now. I think about Eric, who saw it coming, who said it clearly, and who was there when I needed him without making me feel stupid for not having listened. And I think about that kitchen counter, the cold coffee, the 17 notifications. The moment I decided that the most powerful thing I could do was to put the phone face down and walk away. Madison called me a temporary lesson. She said it publicly, to thousands of people, with a broken heart emoji and the confidence of someone who believed she was telling the truth. But Jordan was the one who disappeared when things stopped looking perfect online. He was the one who existed only in the image, who had no substance beneath the curation, who evaporated the moment the performance couldn't be maintained. I was still here. Same apartment, same routines, same careful and unglamorous life. The life that hadn't photographed well. The life that hadn't been compelling enough for the story she wanted to tell. She traded something real for someone who only knew how to look rich through a phone screen. And I stayed silent after she left. Eventually, the truth got louder than I ever needed to be.